My designation is Chasseur Viorla Kais Montier, Commander Kais of the Viorla Sept, Strike Force Commander, Firecast, Tau Empire. I have served the greater good for 22 cycles. I have commanded 31 engagements across 4 frontier zones. My record is, by every metric the Firecast uses to assess a commander's contribution to the greater good's advancement, exceptional. I tell you this not with pride. The Tau do not experience pride in the way that the Gela, the humans, describe the emotion, but with precision, because what I am about to say requires the context of what I was before I said it. The greater good is not a philosophy to the Tau. I want to be clear about this for any non-Tau entity receiving this account. The greater good is the architecture of our civilization, the framework through which every Tau understands their role, their relationships, their purpose, and the purpose of every other being in the Sept. It is not a belief system we chose. It is the structure of how we think. And 3 cycles ago, on Kielshan IV, something happened that the structure could not contain. I have been carrying the uncontained thing since. I am here to give it form. Because a question that has no container does not disappear, it expands. And I would rather give it the correct shape than let it reshape everything around it by default. I am going to tell you what I saw on Kielshan IV that the greater goods framework did not contain. I am going to tell you about the Gela, the humans, the Imperial citizens we had just defeated, specifically one of them, in the specific circumstances of a specific defeat, who did something that the greater goods model of human behavior does not predict and that I have not been able to resolve against the model in the 3 cycles since. I am going to tell you why that failure of resolution matters. And I am going to tell you why a Tau commander who has served for 22 cycles, who has won 31 engagements, who believes completely in the greater good, why that commander is now standing in a location that is technically neither Tau space nor Imperial space, giving this account to an audience she cannot fully identify, because the question is too important to keep inside the model that cannot answer it. The greater good is, at its foundation, a framework for collective advancement, the understanding that every individual's contribution, optimized for the benefit of the whole, produces outcomes that no individual acting alone can achieve. The Tau understand this not as ideology but as observable fact, our civilization's expansion, our technological development, our survival against threats that have destroyed civilizations with greater individual power. All of it is the direct result of collective purpose applied with individual excellence. Each fire warrior is not a unit. Each earthcast engineer is not a tool. Each ethereal is not a ruler. Each fulfills their function in service of the whole, and the whole advances, and the advancement serves all. This is the structure I was raised in. This is the framework through which I understand every engagement, every decision, every loss. When we defeat a human imperial force, the greater goods framework gives me a precise language for what has happened. Beings who have not yet understood collective purpose have been shown, by their defeat, that their individual model is insufficient. The door to the greater good remains open to them, should they choose to walk through it. This is not cruelty, it is patient confidence in the model. I arrived on Kielshan IV with 31 engagements of this confidence intact. I left with a question I could not file. The greater goods model of Gela behavior in defeat is precise and well evidenced. 31 engagements of data, cross-referenced against Earth-cast behavioral analysis spanning 60 cycles. Humans in defeat, under maximum pressure, with no viable tactical option, will prioritize individual survival. This is not a criticism. It is an observed pattern, consistent across species, including many of our own. It is what rational beings do when the collective option has been foreclosed. It is what my own fire warriors would do in the equivalent circumstances and what our doctrine accounts for. Kielshan IV was a frontier engagement, a human imperial colony world on the edge of the Tau expansion zone, inhabited by approximately 40,000 Gela and held by a PDF garrison of 3,000. The strategic value was moderate. The world controlled an approach vector of some significance to our Sept supply lines. The engagement was completed in 31 standard hours, which is efficient by Firecast metrics. The human garrison fought well. I want to record this specifically because the greater goods framework does not require us to diminish those who oppose us, and the garrison's performance was genuinely skilled. They knew the engagement's probable outcome from R3 and they continued fighting in the specific manner of soldiers who have accepted a conclusion and are negotiating the terms of how it arrives. The rearguard position was the last to fall. My forward elements reported taking significant casualties there, 14 fire warriors, which is above expected for a position of its size and suggests the rearguard commander had exceptional tactical competence. I moved to the rearguard position in the first phase of post-engagement assessment, as is standard for engagement review. The battle was over when I arrived. The rearguard commander was dead. 3 of her soldiers were dead. The remaining 3 were prisoners, and kneeling beside my wounded fire warrior, beside the Tau warrior who had been fighting against her, was a human medic with no weapon in her hands. She was treating a Tau fire warrior, a human Imperial medic, in the immediate aftermath of a battle her forces had just lost, surrounded by the dead of both sides, was kneeling beside a wounded Tau warrior, the warrior who had, presumably, contributed to her side's defeat, and applying medical treatment. She was not treating him as a prisoner or an asset. She was treating him because he was wounded and she had the training to address the wound. I stood at the entrance to the rearguard position for my battlesuit's chronometer recorded it as 11 seconds, and I watched her do this. And I felt something I do not have a greater good designation for. And I have been trying to find the designation ever since. I asked the medic why she had treated the wounded Tau warrior. This was the post-engagement interrogation protocol, the standard assessment of human behavior for model calibration. I expected one of the standard response categories. Humanitarian principle observable in approximately 30% of human medics, strategic calculation treating a wounded enemy as a potential asset. Psychological response to training medics sometimes treat by reflex, or defiance treating the enemy as an act of ideological resistance. I had responses in all 4 categories from previous engagements. She said, "He was hurt." I asked her to clarify. She looked at me. Through the battlesuit's external sensors I could observe her expression, which was the specific expression of someone who has been asked to explain something they cannot understand why requires explanation, and she said, "He was hurt." I asked whether she had a strategic reason for the treatment. She said, "He was hurt." I asked whether the treatment was a deliberate act of mercy toward a defeated enemy. She said, "He was hurt." I reviewed the exchange 417 times in the 3 cycles since. Each time, the model tells me the same thing. This answer does not fit the predicted categories. And each time, I reach the same conclusion. The model's categories are insufficient. Her name was Myra. She was 26 years old. She had been a combat medic for 4 years. I asked her, "Why did you treat the Tau warrior?" She said, "He was hurt." I said, "He was your enemy." She said, "He was hurt." I said, "Your forces had just been defeated. You were a prisoner. Treating him provided you no tactical advantage." She said, "He was hurt," 3 times, the same answer. Not as defiance, not as philosophy. As the only answer available to her, the only answer that, from her perspective, the question could have. And I stood in the rearguard position of a frontier engagement on Kielshan IV, and I understood that the greater goods model of human behavior had no category for Myra. Not because she was exceptional, because she was simply responding to the most fundamental thing in front of her, a being in pain, and her capacity to reduce that pain, without calculation, without framework, without the greater good, as though it were the most natural thing in the world, because for her, it was. 417 is a precise number. I reached it after 2 cycles of standard review and 1 cycle of what I can only describe as compulsive review, returning to the data not because a new analytical approach was available but because the incompleteness of the existing analysis was itself a problem I could not leave unresolved. The greater good framework does not accommodate unresolved data. A Tau commander who carries unresolved data carries a structural weakness in their decision-making, which is a risk to the forces under their command, which is a risk to the greater good's advancement. I reviewed the Kielshan for data, specifically the Myra interaction, 417 times because I needed the model to resolve it, and the model repeatedly declined to do so. In each of the first 416 reviews, the conclusion was the same. Data anomaly, insufficient category, flag for Earthcast behavioral analysis. In the 417th review, I changed the question. And the answer to the changed question was the most structurally disruptive thought I have had in 22 cycles of service. I ran it past my secondary analytical processes. They confirmed it. I ran it past the behavioral predictions for the specific context of Kielshan IV. They confirmed it. I ran it past the greater good's own foundational text as recorded in Earthcast archives. They did not contradict it. They simply had not asked the question. And I understood, in that review, that I was carrying something that the greater good needed me to put somewhere, and that putting it correctly required taking it somewhere the greater good's current framework could not reach. In the 417th review, I asked a different question. Not, how does Myra's behavior fit the greater good's model of human behavior in extremity? But, what does Myra's behavior tell me about what the model is missing? And the answer I arrived at in the 417th review, that I have confirmed with every subsequent review, is this. The model assumes that all behavior has a framework, that every action, however irrational it appears, proceeds from some structure of purpose, however misaligned. Myra's behavior does not proceed from a framework. It proceeds from something that exists before frameworks. Something that the greater good accounts for in its outcomes but not in its foundations. Something that, and this is where the question becomes dangerous, the greater good may have been built on top of, rather than having created. And if that is true, then the greater good is not the source of what makes the Tao good. It is the architecture built around the source. And the source is something we share with the humans. With Myra, with all of them, and I do not know what to do with that. I requested an audience with Ethereal and Vitawan, not the Ethereal Supreme, who is not accessible to a Firecast commander on a question of this nature, but a senior Ethereal of the Fourth Sphere Expansion Council, whose purview includes philosophical integration of frontier contact data. I framed my request as a data anomaly requiring doctrinal clarification, which was technically accurate. The audience was granted within one standard cycle. I presented the Kielshan for data and my 417th review conclusion in the specific format the Ethereal Council uses for doctrinal queries: structured presentation, evidence itemized, conclusion stated, question clearly identified. The question I stated was this: if the greater good's framework is the source of Tao moral behavior, why does Myra's behavior, a human, outside the greater good's framework, exhibit the same foundational quality that the greater good most values? The Ethereal's first response was silence. Not the silence of disapproval or the silence of consideration. The silence of something that has been expecting a specific thing to arrive and has watched it arrive. He was silent for 44 seconds by my battlesuit's chronometer. Then he said something that changed everything I thought I understood about the question I was asking. The Ethereal said, "I have been waiting for this question for 9 cycles. Not from you specifically, from someone of your rank and record, someone with enough engagements to have the data and enough precision to ask the question correctly." He said, "You have identified the foundation beneath the architecture." He said, "The greater good is what we built when we found the foundation. The foundation is not ours. It belongs to everything that thinks and feels and chooses." He said, "We call it the greater good because we needed a name for it that all Tau could share, but the humans have other names for it. The Gela Adeptus Ministorum calls it the Emperor's Love. Some humans call it conscience. One of their philosophers, whose work we recovered from a frontier library, called it simply the refusal to watch something suffer without responding." He said, "Myra did not act without a framework. She acted from the framework that exists before all other frameworks. And the question you are asking is not whether the greater good is wrong. It is whether the greater good is complete, and the answer, Commander Kais, is not yet." The Ethereal said, "The foundation is the refusal to watch something suffer without responding." He said it is not a Tau value, it is not a human value. It is not the greater good, it is what the greater good recognized when the first Tau Ethereals looked at what their species was already doing, already protecting, already choosing collective well-being over individual advantage, and gave it a name and a structure and a civilization. The greater good did not create the foundation. It articulated it, and the articulation is our achievement. But the foundation, the specific, irreducible, pre-framework refusal to watch suffering and do nothing, that belongs to everything that can understand suffering. Human, Tau, perhaps others. the Ethereal told me that the most dangerous mistake the Tau can make is to believe that the greater good owns the foundation. That to act from it, one must be part of the greater good. Myra disproves this. Her action on Kielshin disproves it. She acted from the foundation without the architecture. And the architecture cannot account for her. Not because she is outside the greater good. Because she is at the foundation of it, the same foundation, and the framework above it has not yet been extended to include her. The question, the Ethereal told me, is not whether the greater good is wrong. The question is whether it is large enough, and the answer, as he stated, is not yet. I thought about Myra for a long time after the Ethereal's audience. I thought about what she had without the greater good, without the SEP structure, without the Firecast's collective purpose that made her act the way she acted. And I understood what the Ethereal had told me, the greater good is the architecture. But the refusal to watch something suffer without responding, that is older. That is what was already there when the first Tau decided that the collective was better than the individual. It was not the greater good that made that first Tau choose. It was the foundation that Myra has. The foundation that, and this is the conclusion that sent me to this location, to give this account to whatever entities are receiving it. Every being who has ever protected something they did not have to protect has been acting from, not from their doctrine, from the foundation beneath it. And if I am right, then the greater good is not the achievement. The greater good is the recognition that the foundation was always there. And our achievement, the Tau's achievement, is simply that we built something on top of it that we named. I requested permission from the Ethereal Council to return to Kielshin IV under Contact Protocol 7, the Tau Imperial Post-Engagement Humanitarian Framework. My stated purpose was cultural exchange assessment, which was accurate. My specific purpose was to locate Myra and request her transfer under the Medical Exchange Clause, which is a provision I had used twice in 22 cycles for genuinely clinical purposes and was now using for a purpose that did not fit that category and that I did not know how to categorize except as necessary. The Ethereal Council approved the request with unusual speed, which I interpreted as the Senior Ethereal's awareness of the request's actual purpose and his deliberate facilitation of it. The transfer was processed in 44 hours. I met Myra at the camp transfer point with a diplomatic interpreter and two Earthcast cultural liaison officers. She was, by the camp's intake assessment, uninjured and in good health, which I had already verified through other channels because I had been monitoring her status since Kielshin IV, which is not standard practice, which I had done anyway. She looked at me and she said, "You are the commander from the rear guard." I confirmed this, she said. "Did he survive?" I told her yes, she said. "Good." I requested her release under the Contact Protocol's Medical Exchange Clause, a provision that allows Tau forces to request the transfer of human medical personnel for cultural exchange assessment, which is a documented channel that the Imperial bureaucracy processes slowly but does not typically refuse. The release was granted in 44 standard hours. I met Myra at the camp's transfer point. She looked at me, not afraid, the same quality of looking I had observed in the rear guard position, the same directness, and she said, "You are the commander from the rear guard." I said, "Yes," she said. "Did he survive?" I said, "Yes." And she said, "Good." That is all she said. She did not ask why I had come back for her. She did not ask what I wanted. She said, "Did he survive?" And when I told her yes, she said, "Good." And I understood that this was the same quality that had made her treat him, the same foundation, expressed in the simplest possible way. She had not treated him to be thanked, she had treated him because he was hurt. And she was asking if he survived because she cared whether he had survived, not strategically, just good. The conversation took place over to standard hours, using Earthcast Cultural Liaison Officer Fuel as interpreter. I began with a full account of the Kielshin IV post-engagement review, the 417 reviews, and the Ethereal's response. I presented this account in complete analytical detail because Myra had, in my assessment, earned the complete account. She had given me a piece of data. She was hurt 3 times, without elaboration, that had produced the most significant philosophical analysis of my career. She deserved to know what her data had built. She listened with complete attention. She did not ask questions during the account. When I finished, she was quiet for approximately 1 standard minute. Then she said something. The interpreter translated it. I asked the interpreter to repeat it. The interpreter repeated it. I asked for the original Gela rendering alongside the translation. The interpreter provided it. I have reviewed the exchange 42 times since. The translation is accurate. What Myra said is as precise in the original as it appears in the translation. She said, I know, 2 words, containing, as I determined in the first of the 42 reviews, the most complete response to everything I had told her. I told Myra about the 417 reviews. I told her about the Ethereal's audience. I told her, using the interpreter's best translation of the Tao philosophical framework, about the foundation beneath the architecture. She listened with the specific quality of attention I had observed in the rear guard position, complete, present, non-performative. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I know. I said, you know. She said, I know that I was not doing it for the greater good. I was doing it because he was in front of me and he was hurt. She said, that is the only thing I know how to call it, being in front of something. And I said, and this was the thing that surprised me, because I am a Firecast commander and I am not given to unplanned declarations. I said, yes, that is what we were both doing. We were being in front of something. And not looking away. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, so were you, when you came back for me. You were in front of something, and you did not look away. And I could not, in that moment, construct any part of the greater good's framework that contained a better description of what the greater good was actually for. Myra was resettled under Tau Imperial Contact Protocol 7's cultural exchange provision. She is, as of my last confirmed contact, working in a Tau-Seps Human Auxiliary Medical Division on the frontier, which is a position the Tau created for humans who demonstrate the specific quality of Myra's engagement style, beings who act from the foundation without requiring the architecture, who the Tau are still learning to account for within the greater goods framework. The Ethereal Council's formal response to my Kielshin IV report was classified and filed under a designation, I was told, with the specific Tau diplomatic precision that means, we are thinking about this. I was told the classification would be reviewed in 9 cycles. I was told the question had been added to a formal doctrinal review process that the Ethereal Council convenes once per generation. I was told that my record would note this question as a contribution to the greater good's ongoing development, which is the highest designation available for a philosophical inquiry. I was not told what the review would conclude. I did not ask. Because the greater good is not, I have come to understand, a conclusion. It is a direction. It is the architecture that the Tau built on top of the foundation and that we keep building, cycle after cycle, as we encounter more data than the current architecture contains. Myra is data. Her 3-word answer is data. The foundation beneath all our frameworks is data. And the greater good, in the direction of which I have served for 22 cycles and will serve for however many cycles remain to me, is the architecture we build to honor that data. It is not finished. It has never been finished. It is the most important thing we do and the thing we will never stop doing. The Tau do not have a word for what Myra called being in front of something and not looking away. We will need to find one, because the greater good is not complete without it. And completion, perfect, permanent, total completion, is what Nurgle offered. And the root does not die, and the wall holds. And the flowers come back, and across every framework, beneath every architecture, in every language that thinking beings have ever built to describe why they protect each other, it is the same thing. It was always the same thing. The greater good recognizes this now. It is time to build the architecture that says so. Myra is still working. The greater good is still building. And the foundation, the refusal to watch suffering without responding, is in the Tau, in humans, in a Night Lord, in a Death Guard Marine, in every confessor who has sat in that chair across 2 seasons of this series. Season 2 has begun. Subscribe, because the confessions are going further, beyond the Imperium, beyond the Chaos Gods, into every corner of the galaxy where something thinks and chooses and sometimes, despite everything, does not look away. And in the comments, the Season 2 question. What non-human voice do you want to hear confess? The foundation is universal. Let's find it everywhere.